All right. Thank you for coming to the talk. This is Open the Gates, talking security in your org. My name is Rick Martinez. I'll go through this today, and I know I am between you and lunch, so I will try to make it quick. I talk pretty quick anyway, so yeah, try to keep up. So I'm going to talk about today a little bit about a model or a case study kind of framework that I created at my employer as an attempt to kind of bypass this concept of gatekeepers and these walls that have built up around kind of security practitioners, awareness, and culture. So the reason I did this is to kind of build a security community from the ground up within my organization. And hopefully the goal today is that everyone in this room, being relative subject matter experts in security, can go and implement this same concept within your own company tomorrow. So just real quick about me. I developed security strategy for Dell PCs. So if you're using a Dell PC, thanks. Hopefully we're helping to secure you and your infrastructure. My background is in BIOS and firmware security. And I also kind of initiated and influenced and built a lot of the product security for our PC organization over the last 10 years or so. My dog does really like to take really serious selfies, so I got to watch out for that. So what is security gatekeeping, and what problem are we trying to solve, right? And how did this come about? So I think one of the biggest issues or one of the biggest causes of security gatekeeping today is really just very simply how we talk about security with other people, especially within our organization, but also at conferences and with colleagues and other companies as well. And it comes down to the lexicon or the jargon, right? Just use Signal, just use Tor, right? I'm going to apply it to product security, right? Just do SDL. Come on, it's easy. Just do threat modeling. So made a little graphic to kind of illustrate that. Hopefully it hits the mark, no pun intended. And then we have this concept of the C-suite, which is not really the C-suite, but my own, CISSP, CISO, certified ethical hacker, all of that stuff that, again, it's all great stuff, but it does kind of start to build those walls, or has some part in building those walls. And then we have compliance. Oh, everybody loves compliance, right? You've got this concept of governance, policy, and controls. And again, all of these are needed in our industry and in protecting our customers and protecting our infrastructures, but they sound like really official words, right? So if you're someone that doesn't know a lot about security and you're trying to learn about it and you're trying to be involved in the community, they're pretty scary. So, not that we shouldn't stop using them, but we should kind of rethink how we use them and in which context. But I think ultimately the gatekeeping is typically a siloed responsibility or siloed knowledge, right? And again, all of these, the way we talk about security contributes to this, right? Security is somebody else's job. How many times have we heard that? Or I'm just the VR person. I'm just the incident response person. Those are things that we can address. So a lot of the ways that we try to address this today is with security training, right? With a few kind of very expensive exceptions, security training doesn't really work that great. It's not very interesting. It's usually not directly relevant to the student's actual role. And it's usually just about a checkbox, right? About compliance. There's that compliance word again. So people that own training companies, or even just general pundits, will probably say, well, isn't this training good enough for the fundamentals, right? To apply everywhere. Realistically, though, come on. You go to a complete new developer or new organization or team within your group, and you go to them, and the first thing you ask them is, do you threat model, right? Very basic concept. We're talking different languages, and that's the problem. So how do we fix this, or what is the kind of the root of that knowledge problem? I think it's retention, right? When we talk about security concepts, when we do security training, these things don't click the same way for everybody. High-level concepts that we kind of rely on as an industry, like threat modeling, they actually require quite a bit of specialization and practice. I don't know how many people in this room do threat modeling, but if you've ever done it for a motherboard, for hardware, it's a little bit different than a web app, right? That's not going to be in the training class that your corporation probably bought from some online vendor. Also, the training focuses on what to do or what not to do, and typically not how to do it. That's an exercise left to the reader, which is part of the problem. And then, don't want to harp on this too much, but, annual compliance training is typically rushed. Obviously, I would never do this, but a lot of people in your organization probably try to click through as fast as they can and move on to their actual workload for the day. So how do we actually fix this? As security practitioners, as the audience in the room today, we change the security conversation, right? We stop talking about security the way we're doing it today, and we do something else. And what I think we need to do is we have to broaden the security conversation. We need to get away from these silos. We need to get away from this specialization of security knowledge, and we need to go broad. We need to bring all of the organization into the conversation. So what I'm going to talk about now is how I managed to do that within Dell. And I think it was it's taken me a long time. I think it was very successful. I'll talk a little bit about how successful it was in a minute. But I want to kind of offer it as kind of a case study. Again, this is something that anybody here in the room can go implement in their company tomorrow. And what it is, I call it the big security meeting. It wasn't an accident that it's also called, that we call it the BS meeting, and you'll understand why as we move along. So, the why, the fundamentals. Make security interesting, fun, relevant, and accessible. Seems pretty obvious, but do your compliance training classes do that? I don't think so. Build security culture from the bottom up, right? Don't do it top down. Let's go grassroots. Let's get the people that are actually writing code, that are writing the bugs in all of the software and firmware that we develop, and bring them into the conversation earlier. Practice humility, practice inclusion. Use the concept that anyone can be an expert, right? This allows you to broaden that conversation across the organization. Bring in people that wouldn't normally talk about security, make them feel welcome, bring them into the meeting, and have a real effect and impact on them almost just organically, right? So this is familiar for most security conferences, right? At least in spirit. But why not? Why don't we do this in our own organizations today? So let's do it, right? Open the gates. Here are some of the gates that I've found that we've been able to kind of knock down over the last 7 years. Organizational gates, right? Being able to spread across the organization, respectfully using distribution lists and potentially career advancements and career movements to pull more and more teams into your meeting. Span different grade levels. It doesn't matter if you're a new college hire or a fellow at your company, right? Everybody can present. Everybody can provide input and value to this series and this concept. Subject matter expertise, same thing. One of the important things I think too is bending the rules, right? You got to keep content a little bit edgy to make it interesting, right? People want to believe that they're in some kind of secret club and you're talking to them and they're part of the club, right? That's part of the problem, but one of the things we can do is we can make that club a lot bigger, and that's what we need to do. And then just let it grow organically. Like I said, over the last 7 years, it's been amazing how big this thing has grown. One of my colleagues reminded me a minute ago, I actually canceled one of the instances of this meeting a couple weeks ago, and there were 30 or 40 people that showed up and just talked about security without me. So how's that for kind of bringing down the gates and kind of firing the gatekeepers? So what is it? Bi-weekly, optional meeting, always on Fridays. Very important time frame and for the spirit of the meeting. Cross-discipline, bring HR in, bring sales in, bring marketing in. Obviously, bring product security, bring security architects in. Make sure that you curate the agenda. Focus on interesting topics that have a broad appeal, both to the professional side of the person and the personal. Very important, too, to kind of expand that base. And then also, you can't do this on your own, right? So one of the things that is important, bring in guest collaborators and presenters, including folks outside of your company. And I'll talk about that at the end because that's kind of the big one. So really what we're doing here is it's essentially an internal security mini-conference every other week. Also think about travel at your company and expensing travel. Not everybody gets to go to Black Hat. Not everybody gets to go to ACOD, right? So bring the conference to them. Bring the highlights. Bring the important things, the key takeaways back to back to your entire organization. I'm going to go a little bit quick through this. I kind of have a little bit of a DIY background. I believe in the ethos, and building that next generation, right? So as the host, as the organizer of this meeting in your own organization, hopefully, a couple of best practices. Present what you know. Obviously, that's a good one. But also present what you don't know, right? Take this as an opportunity to do new research on your own and present about it in your internal conference or internal meeting. Practice humility. If you went down the path of some research and you just couldn't make it work, do a talk about that, because that's what people learn from as well. It does require a little bit of investment from the host. News story curation, we'll talk a little bit about that. Developing an intriguing and enthusiastic agenda email. This is critical, right? Someone was talking about passion earlier being a little bit more important than technical. People feed off of that passion, and they read into it, and they come to the meeting and they learn more in that mindset. And if there's no volunteers that week, you got to create the presentation. That might be staying up late one night to do it, but it's worth it. So build your audience base, build your volunteer base, and also maintain your credibility and the content, right? A couple of bad presentations or poor presentations, and that audience base may start to diminish and kind of take away from some of the value. I'll skip past this. If you haven't seen this book, it's about some of the bands that were around in the 80s, and they didn't get mainstream success, but they influenced bands like Nirvana and others that did in the 90s. You can be that person in your organization. So how did we do? And that's really how did we do? Because I started this, but really it's a group effort. It's a volunteer effort within Dell. We're in our 7th year. Current invite list includes over 650 recipients across the company. That's across all lines of businesses: servers, PCs, storage. We've got a little bit of problem with BCC sometimes and reply all, but that's the nature of the beast. We started in October 18, 2013 with 12 attendees. Our last meeting in December, even with kind of the beginning of the holidays, we had almost 100 attendees. So I think that's a pretty good track record. We've kind of evolved an agenda that seems to work with us. Really quick CISSP topic of the week, followed by a main presentation that either I do or someone, one of the volunteers does, and then everybody's favorite, current events, right? Some example content. We've talked about password managers. We do live hacking demos, again, keeping it a little bit edgy. We do conference representations, like I mentioned before. Any new vulnerabilities or breaches. I'm sure day after tomorrow we'll be talking about Patch Tuesday. We've had some high-profile guest presenters. I won't name them because they're not here. And obviously, current events is one of the most kind of commented on and I believe interesting parts of the big security or BS show. Very important to keep a record of what you've done. This is something that we started, and this is not meant to be read because there's probably some personal or at least internal Dell information on there. But keeping a record of what you've done so that as people come into the organization, into the company, as they learn about your big security meeting, they can go and look at what's been talked about before, and that can kind of key them into the types of discussions that are made. that are had in that meeting, and then they can volunteer to present as well. This was this is actually a real agenda from December. We presented about TPMs, Trusted Platform Modules, and then we had a few news stories that we went over about HackerOne and some other things that were relevant for that time frame, current events, as I like to call them. Just real quick, I'll go into a little bit. I'll scroll through these pretty quick. Just some example presentations we've done. Secure Boot. We do Black Hat DEF CON 101. We've actually been very successful at bringing new people into the conference travel fold. Password managers. Other kind of more reverse engineering type presentations have been well received. I like this one because this is kind of a presentation of a presentation of a presentation. This is like third generation of a Matthew Garrett's presentation from a Linux conference. And then sometimes, quite honestly, I've got a day job too. I phone it in. Sometimes I take a white paper that was just released. I do a little bit of annotation, and then we walk through it during the meeting. And it's actually been quite successful too. Irony of all ironies. I started recording the big security meeting just this past year. We've uploaded those to our training site, and now it's actually compliance training that you can get credit for in your learning plan. So ironic, so meta. So you can change the security conversation as well. Yes, everybody in this room, and hopefully online that views this video on YouTube. It sounds a lot better when you're asking someone, "Hey, did you take your security compliance training?" Sounds kind of lame. "Hey, have you heard of this BS meeting? They do a lot of cool stuff in there. It's really fun. You should check it out." That works a lot better. All right, so I wanted to give a little bit of idea of what I want to kind of drive the next phase of the discussion, or the Q&A, right? I'd like to know, is this something that you do in your own organization already? How do you talk to your org? Is this something that you could possibly implement in your organization? I definitely want to know about that. How can we collaborate? One of the things that I really kind of keyed in on and wanted to focus on as I built this presentation is that what about some cooperative or community syndication, right? So I mentioned that we do external guest presenters. What if there were big security meetings in a bunch of large companies or small companies, and we exchanged presentations? I could present in your big security meeting. You can present in mine. I think that's a very powerful and kind of community-oriented tool and opportunity, right? But most of all, you don't have to, if you don't want to talk about it now, if you go and do this in your own organization, let me know about it. I want to hear about it. If I can help in any way, just feel free to reach out. You can email me at work, or I'm on Twitter at rickmartinez06. And thank you for listening. Open for questions.
Great. Thanks very much. That's actually really cool. We do, well, I used to, past tense, run a similar meeting. I think I like BS better than the one we came up with. But it was an hour once a week. It was the favorite meeting of every people who attended. It took a lot of effort on the person that managed that community.
Right.
But everyone thought it was a very fruitful
I think
time.
the impact and the results are kind of worth that effort, especially if you can spread it out and delegate and get those volunteers in.
So one thing that we did that you always want to try to buy some time at the very beginning because people are trickling in. So we would have geek battles with trivia questions tied to the subject that we're going to talk about. And so, again, it takes a little bit of curation and time to do that, but the geek battle was also a very fun part of the discussion. And we usually started the geek battle 2 minutes before the meeting started, just so that people then would call in ahead of time.
That's a great idea. I'm going to steal that.
Yeah. So, okay, we have a couple comments from folks. So I'll start with Joel.
So, Rick, I really liked your presentation, and it made me remember years and years ago, it was almost 10 years ago, I used to run the Pentagon Security Forum. So it was a monthly thing where we pulled in people from all over and also talked about incidents and things that were going on. But one of the things about I was wondering if you have, it might be difficult, but any way of understanding if like the developers and those types of things, if you're actually making a positive net security benefit, and how do you incentivize them, because security is a non-functional set of requirements, right? How do you incentivize them to actually build this in, and do you see that this meeting helps them reach out to you when they need specific guidance and those types of things?
Yeah, I'm going to answer the second half first. It does, as a standard meeting on the calendar, it does operate as a little bit of a point of contact for me. So definitely developers that have security questions, even if they don't know who to go to in the organization, they contact me and I can route them in the right direction. So kind of as a visibility and awareness aspect, definitely works for that. And whether or not it's having an impact on the developers, I think so. One of the interesting things that kind of is related to this is that over the last 3 years, we've really built up our product security capability and our security champions program. A lot of those security champions were identified from people that came to this meeting, right? So we're actually using that opportunistically to grow that that knowledge and that impact in the development community.
Hi, my name is Mambir. So quick question on, makes sense on technical people coming to this and getting a lot out of it, but I think the other side of this is that we always see the non-technical, the business side is probably the biggest threat service or target that we always have to deal with. And I wanted to know how their engagement had been through this and response in general, as well as were they actually actively participating in providing feedback that would benefit them? I think that's one of the bigger things that I could see this would be beneficial, but only that would be my main focus audience to get them asking the right questions.
Yeah, I think that's where some of the tailoring and curation comes in. I have it a little bit easy because Dell is such a large company. We have plenty of engineers to do this, right? So it's a majority of engineers that show up. But we do have, like I said, a lot of sales and marketing. And I have gotten good feedback, especially from like pre-sales and customer-facing marketing people, that this meeting kind of gives them more context of what they're going out and talking to customers. So it improves their customer conversation. Does that answer your question? Thanks.
Yeah, and my experience is similar in that our meeting was a engineering and brainstorming session. Again, I like your acronym much better. But the premise behind the engineering and brainstorming was we wanted a diversity of thought in terms of a problem that we're trying to solve. And this was the time that we had allocated. Whenever someone says, hey, we don't want to engineer that now, the question is, well, when are we going to ever get around to that? And people knew, okay, we can set aside, we can sign up on the engineering and brainstorming list, and that gets added to the agenda. Cool. And we usually actually had a pretty long backlog, which made the curation process a little easier. Sure. But the point of it was to say, look, we actually need a lot of perspectives, including non-technical ones, and we tried to invite folks to participate as a part of that. And then the guest speaker piece was something that we also did. We tried to bring in people from other organizations to come in and share their perspectives. And it was all TLP, super hot red kind of stuff. The bosses never knew, and kind of things. But that's it. It was a great way to collaborate, as you were saying.
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions or thoughts?
Quick comment on that. As you're kind of curating the invite list, also think about who you don't want to invite to the meeting, because that's important too, right? To make sure that you continue to keep that spirit and the discussion open.
So on that point, we actually, one of the things that we try to make very clear to people is you check rank at the door. Check rank at the door.
Yeah.
And there are people who, one of the things that we were trying to do with this type of meeting was to change the culture of the organization as well. And in that perspective of saying, look, even though the boss's part of this meeting, try to ignore that fact, okay? And in some respects, if they were in a web meeting, we would ask them, change your name, okay, just to make it so that it doesn't cause people to get antsy, right? but just to hear and contribute and to even, it was okay if they talked, then sometimes they give themselves away, but if they type, then it doesn't. And so it invites a type of group that you would otherwise not get with a level of psychological safety that you might not otherwise have.
Exactly. It's great to hear.
So.
Yep.
Eric, you said during the talk that bad talks can be strategically disabling or really bad. I think if people in the room are thinking about doing this, maybe one of the most intimidating things is doing what you've done, or just taking a curation role, and not just the extra work, but just like how often do you have to say no to people? Any tips for how you handle that? Like, is that even an issue, or how do you think about avoiding bad talks in your strategy?
It hasn't been an issue. It is usually a challenge getting volunteers. So you can kind of manage it on the back end, right? If you do get a volunteer and the talk didn't go great, one, it's an opportunity for mentoring that person, right? And then two, you don't necessarily have to continue to reach out to them to do more talks, right? So it's a little bit kind of behind the scenes stuff, but it usually works out. It hasn't been a big problem.
We also used it internally as a gate, not a minimum gate per se, but a supporting gate if they wanted to speak publicly at some conference. Yeah. So the fact that they had presented internally at the session was a strong positive consideration to accepting a talk for some other conference externally as well. So we were trying to provide the right incentives, again, to change or shift the culture in a way that makes security not seem so intimidating and threatening as well.
So I got to share this story today, and I'm very excited about sharing it again. There is a CISO from Dubai, and I don't remember her name, I'm sorry about that, who is taking marketing tools like HubSpot and similar, and follows clicks and opens and click-throughs and all that those marketing terms I don't necessarily know, and sees who actually opens up her emails, who actually is interested in security, who reads up on it. And then she engages further. She makes them into her champions, and she makes them more educated, and she has what in the cert world, I've only seen this done really in Eastern Europe, so it didn't really go out into the States, but what we call human sensors. So essentially, just by using marketing tools, you can say who is actually interested and engaged further with them. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty cool.
That's pretty interesting. A little sneaky, but I like it.
Yeah, to talk about this from a framework or like a philosophy track standpoint, I guess part of the question overall that we can think through is what is it about security, or what is it about the way that we portray security that actually causes engagement as opposed to people running away? Yeah. And we talked earlier, yesterday I think it was, around the notion of the word safety versus the word security, right? So people don't care to hear a security briefing, but they do care to hear a safety briefing if they have stake in it, right? So if you might die, then you're going to probably listen to a safety briefing. You might not care so much about a security briefing if someone else's asset might be stolen, right? Yep. And so somehow creating some stake in it then creates engagement, or at least makes it more sticky than most of the security stuff that we throw out at people. So anyway, it's just to think through what creates stronger engagement, and what are the principles that we can follow to make security more effective in that regard. That would be the type of topic that we may want to consider as a part of the work groups. So with that, we have I think we have lunch